Well, they go back more than 10,000 years, the early people do. And indigenous South Floridians in many different parts of South Florida, but especially in high ground, somewhere near bodies of water. These were not agriculturalists. They hunted, they fished, they gathered berries, what have you. They traversed a lot of real estate. They got around by dugout canoes. We believe dugout canoes going back many, many years, decades, generations, maybe even millennia, because if they were in the swamp, and for the most part they were on high ground, we're on high ground right here in downtown Miami, but if they were in the swamp, or even in Biscayne Bay, or even in the Atlantic Ocean, or even the Miami River, you needed, a way to convey yourself. And these dugout canoes, generally made out of cypress trees, which are ideal for this. So to get around in many ways, they needed those dugout canoes. You didn't have roads. You didn't really even have pathways. So you got around by water primarily. There had been these so-called Indian Wars, the Second Seminole War, 1835 to 1842, Third Seminole War, 1855 to 1858. And in these wars, you had American forces pitted against Seminole Indians. We didn't really distinguish between Seminoles and Miccosukes at that time. The generic name was Seminole for them. They came down from Georgia, members of the Creek Nation. It all centered on the American effort to move Native Americans west of the Mississippi River, to open up more lands east of the river to American settlers. And the resistance would lead to these wars. The canoe is really important because by then they were living primarily in the wetlands, both the Everglades and Big Cypress Swamp. They had taken refuge there during the Second and Third Seminole Wars, fighting guerrilla warfare. They were fighting a superior force, meaning more guns, more people, more training. That would be the American Army, versus a scattered band of Seminoles. What the Seminoles realized early on was the Americans weren't trained or equipped for riverine, for watery warfare. So they used the refuge of the Everglades to their advantage. So they became the riverine people. And to get around in the Everglades, you have to have a dugout canoe. There are parts of the Everglades that are above the water level. We call them islands or hammocks, but a lot of the Everglades is watery, and you've got to get around. And so the dugout canoe was the prime vehicle. I talked to an elderly Seminole Indian about 20 years ago up in Big Cypress. He was making a dugout canoe. You could see the expertise that this man had. And I said, well, how long does this take? He said, it takes about 8 months. And he said, we're looking for a cypress tree that we had judged to be at least 125 years of age. We'll fell the tree, we'll slice it through the middle, begin to take out that tuff inside there. Sometimes we fire it to accelerate the process. And the Pioneer era means that we're beginning slowly to move to a rapprochement, a getting along together between Native Americans and the settlers who came here who were white and black. There had been this idea, if we could drain the Everglades, we'll create the richest farmland in the world, because that water's been there forever. Tree branches have fallen to the shallow bottom of the Everglades. Leaves have fallen to the shallow bottom. So they have really been nutrients for the soil there. All we need to do is drain it, and we're going to create all this really rich farmland. Let's drain the land, we'll bring more people down here, and they can farm out there. But as time went on, with this enormous growth of South Florida, that drained land becomes the venue for suburban Miami-Dade County, suburban Broward County, suburban Palm Beach County. All the rage in women's hats in the late 19th, early 20th century were these feathers from these snowy egrets that bore beautiful feathers. So there became just an all-out attack against them, and probably millions of these birds were killed by plume hunters, who then would remove their feathers and sell these to be used in the manufacturing of women's hats all over the United States and even other parts of the Western world. And of course, we get into mechanized vehicles by the late 19th, early 20th century. One of the mechanized vehicles that begins to appear in the early 1900s would be the airboat. Because the airboat moves you much faster, of course, through the wetlands than does the dugout canoe, where you need to use oars in some cases to get around. And so this will bring you closer to, say, for example, you're a plume hunter. It'll take you closer to where these birds nest and what have you. And so the airboat becomes a big part of it. But what's happened in the airboat, since there are now laws against plume hunting, or at least mass killings of snowy egrets, the airboat has become now a huge tourist vehicle. So people come out on the Miami Trail, and there's these various stops along the way where you can get into an airboat and somebody will take you to the wetlands. And I mean, it's a unique experience, even for somebody who grew up in Miami like myself, to be in those airboats, see the Everglades that way. You can imagine what it's like for somebody coming up from Germany. Like Marjorie Stoneman Douglas said in her book, Everglades, River of Grass, first sentence, there are only one Everglades. And so it's a unique experience, especially for people who haven't been here before.